And welcome everyone. I'm Veronica Butcher, Executive Director of Mothers and Others for Clean Air. Welcome to our second Clean Air Conversations. When we planned this conversation topic over a month ago, we never could have imagined we would be in the moment we are now, with the weeks leading up to today full of violent atrocities committed at the hands of the police in this nation. I, as a mom, am heartbroken, and I know many of us are grieving. And we here at Mothers and Others are more passionate than ever to continue our work to end systemic racism while creating a just, equitable, and healthy community in the Southeast. No one else should die from systemic racism or dirty air in the Southeast or across our country. Our goal with these Clean Air Conversations is to continue to offer the space for these dialogues and shine light on the systemic racism, particularly environmental racism, which created a world where Black and Brown communities are bearing an extraordinarily higher amount of air pollution, as well as impacts from climate change, resulting in very serious health conditions. As we see now with COVID-19, these serious health conditions are leading to higher rates of deaths within these communities as well. We started to look in depth at these issues in our first Clean Air Conversation last month with Dr. Gerald Durley, and we encourage all of you to check out our YouTube and Facebook channels for that recording. Now I'd like to turn it over to our moderators today, our co-founders of Mothers and Others for Clean Air, Laura Turner Seydel and Stephanie Blank, two moms who are a force for change at the intersection of children's health, air pollution, and racial equity.
Hi, Veronica, and our esteemed guests and panelists. Thank you to you all for being with us today. I just wanted to start by saying, Veronica, that was a very powerful opening, and I couldn't agree with you more about where we are at this moment, and who would have thought that we're moving backwards at light speed, it seems. You know, the EPA rollbacks are really unforgivable at this time when there's a pandemic that affects people's lung function and our children's lung function. You know, it's unbelievable. And then the problems are mostly man-made, and the solutions and the technologies exist. We just need to scale them. And Stephanie and I, for 16 years, since we started Mothers and Others for Clean Air, have been moms on a mission to work for all children, especially in our community and in the Southeast, so that our children can have cleaner air to breathe, a better quality of life, and a better future. So with that being said, Stephanie, I'm gonna turn it over to my co-founder for many years. And thank you, Steph.
Thanks, Laura, and thank you to everybody who is joining with us today. I know in these times it's easy to feel overwhelmed and depressed and a little bit helpless in the face of everything that we must all do. But I did want to share that my family and I walked in a march on Sunday in a part of town called Buckhead in Atlanta, that we were all a little unsure how we would be received in this march. And the outpouring of love and support from that community, I think, was amazing and overwhelming to all of us, and showed us, I think for the first time, you know, I felt a real sense of optimism about the fact that people really are listening. They're not just paying it lip service. They want to be there to help make change, and they're willing to open their eyes to things that we have not wanted to look at for a long time. So it was really, really a beautiful thing to be a part of on Sunday. With that, though, comes a lot of questions that we are just now beginning to really kind of grapple with based on this pandemic. And its effects on our health that are exacerbated because of existing air quality issues. One of the things we have seen with the global shutdown from COVID-19, and a lot of people have been posting about it, we've seen images, is the drastic drop in air pollution. People in India are seeing the Himalayas for the first time. I've noticed it. My friends have been saying, are there more birds singing this spring than there have been in the past? So one of the questions I think in all of our minds, has there really been an improvement in the US with what we've seen from COVID-19? We'll ask the scientists that are with us today these questions. But also more troubling is what's happened with the EPA and the rollbacks. And have these created what we want to call hotspots, where bad air continues to be an issue, particularly across the Southeast and especially for communities of color. So we hope you will stay with us till the end of this conversation as we discuss the solutions, including how we address systemic environmental racism. This is a conversation as well. It's not just so that you hear from us. We want you to ask questions as we go along in this discussion. I'm going to be monitoring the chat box. And if you will just post your questions on the chat box, we will make sure that we get as many of those answered. If you're joining us live on Facebook, first we want to welcome you. And please use the comments feature to ask your questions. One of our team members will make sure that I get all those questions. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Laura to welcome our scientists.
So let's do that. Without further ado, introduce our amazing panelists today. Dr. Christina Hemphill Fuller is an associate professor of the School of Public Health at Georgia State University in the Department of Population Health Sciences. Dr. Fuller works in the field of air quality exposure assessment and environmental epidemiology. Dr. Rachel Cleetus is the policy director with the Climate and Energy Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. She leads the program's efforts in designing effective and equitable policies to address climate change and advocating for their implementation. We are so grateful for your time and dedication to science. So I'm just gonna throw the first question out there. Has the global shutdown led to cleaner air? And if so, will it last? Dr. Fuller, would you like to take the first stab at this?
Dr. Fuller, you're on mute,
actually.
Oh, and it told me too, so great. So there's a short and a long answer. So the short answer is that yes, on a large scale, there has been a reduction in air pollution. And that's also true in the Southeast, as it has been for other cities across the globe. Particularly here in the Atlanta area and other cities, a lot of that is due to a lot of cars being off the road because people are at home, they're not driving their cars, a lot of deliveries are not being made. And for some of the pollutants that we are concerned about, which are very important for health, it has been reduced. In terms of kind of a long question, if we go back to business as normal, the pollution is going to come back as well. So this is something that's temporary based on the changes that have been put in place and how people are concerned that we're definitely going to talk about during this conversation is that's on an area-wide scale. But the research that I do and where I'm most concerned is for people who live very close to sources. If you live very close to a highway, air pollution may still be high for you because there's still a certain number of cars there, they're not zero. Or if you live close to a power plant, we're still using energy and air pollution may not be low close to those areas as well. So there may still be hotspots, even though as overall, it's been a good deal of reduction.
Yeah, just to
Dr. Fu?
add to, sorry, just to add to that briefly, indeed, we are seeing some temporary reductions in emissions, heat trapping emissions that are fueling climate change, as well as local air and water pollutants. So globally, in the first part of this year, we've had about a 17% decrease in CO2 emissions in the first quarter of this year. And here in the US, the EIA is projecting that our energy-related carbon dioxide emissions will be down about 14% this year. And it's primarily a result of the lower emissions from less use of fossil fuels for transportation, for generating power, for industry, et cetera. But there's no question that this is a temporary dip. It is not actually supported by any deep, sustained, robust policies to shift us to a clean energy economy. It is falling very brutally hard on those who can least afford it because they're losing jobs. This is not climate policy. This is not clean air policy. This is a very harsh measure. It's a temporary measure. It's a necessary measure to cope with the public health crisis, but it should not be mistaken for the real policy change we need. And finally, I would like to say that many of these impacts we're looking at are due to long-term cumulative burdens from pollution. So a temporary shutdown, it might improve your visibility, might make a particular day the air is easier to breathe, but it's not going to do away with the long-term damage to people's lungs and hearts. It's not going to lower the cumulative burden of atmospheric carbon dioxide emissions that have piled up over years and years. And with COVID-19, we've seen this because it's the long-term exposure to PM 2.5 that is causing a higher mortality in some communities. And that doesn't get turned off when you just stop driving for a couple of months.
And then the airlines have been shut down, and for Atlanta, we're the busiest airport, and so that those emissions were basically shut down. So we did have much cleaner air days, I think, due to the transportation sector, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think the lesson is it is us who are causing these emissions, right? So in the seeds of that are our solutions as well. We can see that it's our activities from burning fossil fuels that are leading to these emissions.
Yeah, and I think that's become evident for more people because there's lots of articles that are out in the popular media, not scientific articles, but they're based on scientific research that has gone on that has really highlighted how things have changed, and we know it's based on the changes that we have made as human beings.
And Stephanie, do we have any questions coming in on chat, in the chat room?
Not yet, but one of the questions that I had, and I was shocked when I saw what the actual kind of number was, over the last 4 years, we've seen over 100 regulations which protect public health and the environment rolled back. We've also watched the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, suspend enforcement of critical monitoring and reporting requirements for industries that pollute. Are we seeing an impact from these rollbacks? Are they creating these hotspots? And if so, do we know where they're doing it?
Yeah, there's no question that during the course of the last few years, the EPA seems to have abandoned its mission to protect public health and the environment, and in fact has gone in the opposite direction to protect the interests of fossil fuel and other polluting industries and put their profits, their narrow profit interests above the interests of the public and the public health. And the burden of that will no doubt fall disproportionately on communities of color and low-income communities. This is true because people know it from their lived experience, from the community science that they see. And it is true if you read the science in journals. EPA's own scientists have said this, that the data unequivocally show that a disproportionate burden of pollution falls on communities of color, particularly African American and Latino communities, Native American communities, and low-income communities. And in this moment, when we're in the midst of a public health crisis, it's particularly cruel to see an administration that's running rampage on those very public health protections. Just since the start of this year, there's been a one after the other rollback. The fuel efficiency standards, the mercury and air toxic standards attacked, NEPA now through an executive order and other guidance. They've gone after the cost benefit guidance from the administration that they want to eliminate large categories of benefits from direct benefits from public health and essentially rig the math so that they can set weaker regulations. It's just incomprehensible, it's reprehensible, and this is an EPA that has abandoned its mission entirely.
So one of the narratives that we've all been hearing is that the reason it's disproportionately impact communities of color is because of lack of access to healthcare. There's been a lot of discussion around pre-existing conditions such as diabetes and hypertension. But one of the things that I have not heard discussed is whether or not this is an issue around the very air that they've been breathing and the damage that that may have caused to their lungs and their ability to battle COVID-19 because it attacks that same organ. Could you speak about that at all, either of you?
Right. So it's well known that air pollution is lots of different health issues. And when studies were first started many, many years ago, they looked at exposures to air pollutants and respiratory disease and found, oh, there are some linkages there. But it doesn't just stop there. It's related to heart disease, related to different kinds of cancers, related to things like diabetes, which is something relatively new. And these conditions can make you vulnerable to exposures such as COVID-19. So many times you have in communities, especially communities of color and poor communities, you have all these different disadvantages which are all put together. And as scientists, we're realizing that we have to look at multiple exposures and understand the social determinants of health. So it's not just you are eating this particular food. If you are living in a specific community, you may be exposed to air pollution there. You may not have access to good health care. You may not have healthy food. And then all of those increase your risk when you're faced with something like COVID-19. So air pollution definitely makes people more vulnerable to other diseases. And it's disproportionate, meaning that it's not equal among different communities, and that's based on race and class. And that's driven by lots of social factors and historical factors over many, many years.
So we're getting, oh, sorry, did you want to say something, Dr. Cleetus?
Yeah, just very briefly, Dr. Fuller is making a very clear point here. People are more being impacted worse, not because of any genetic thing, or the only reason is racism and socioeconomic disparities, just discrimination. So where people live is a legacy of where they were allowed to live, in cities you'd had mortgage redlining. In more rural areas, people had to live in places that flood often or that were mosquito infested swamplands, and these are the places now that we're seeing visited by storm surge flooding. Just this past weekend, Louisiana, they had this storm, Cristobal, that hit, and you see the places that are getting flooded. So where are the toxic dumps? Where are the landfills? These are not accidents. So people need to not just look at a snapshot in time right now. Where were highways built through communities to break them up, but also expose them to the pollution from those vehicles? our country has a lot to answer for in terms of how racism has deeply impacted the very bodies and health of communities.
I agree, and I think we have to be careful around this narrative about the pre-existing conditions, because I think in some ways it gets implied that through lifestyle, this is what's made people susceptible or sick. And in fact, it may be the very environment that they have to live in that could be causing the most damage. And so I guess that brings us to some of the questions that we're getting. And number one, how do we raise awareness around this, particularly for individuals who are at the highest risk? And two, if we're going to raise awareness and create a call to action, what are some of the policies that locally governments could focus on to address these environmental issues within communities of color?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think one of the first thing is to make sure that people understand, when you're saying environmental racism, that environmental racism has been established for a long, long time. And it does include intentional racism of redlining and putting Black people only in certain communities. But a lot of times it's also unintentional, because perhaps this is low income, so it's more affordable to put a specific industry there. So it's also unintentional as well. And that maybe can take out some people's guilt or resistance to really acknowledging environmental racism. You just want to understand that it really exists and it affects people's health. And then we have to think about environmental justice. And for the environmental justice, we not only make equitable the placement of things that are good for the environment, and to reduce the fact that people are being disproportionately exposed due to their race or their class, but in addition, also to reduce putting out pollutants in the first place. And that encourages people to really kind of rethink of how we live our lives and trying to move forward instead of going back to business as usual. So I think that's a good framework kind of just to start with, so people can start to own some of that. And then people just need to talk about it with their friends, with other people that they know at work. A lot of it's going to be spread by person to person, of really acknowledging some of the issues that we need to fix.
Yeah, I mean, to build on that, I think that a key understanding here is we're not going to solve big complex problems like, say, climate change by just solving it in a corner here and thinking of reducing CO2 emissions. This has to be about people's lives and improving the quality of people's lives. And it's very connected to other kinds of air and toxic and water pollution. It's connected to people's health. It's connected to creating jobs and economic opportunities where people live. But I think for a long time, the climate, the mainly very white, relatively white climate environmental community has talked about climate change like it's divorced from these realities, and has talked about solutions that haven't centered equity and justice appropriately. So I think the moment we're in right now is recognizing the intersectionality of these problems, and that we have the ability here to solve multiple problems at the same time, but we have to do it the right way. We can't expect some trickle-down benefits. Oh, we're gonna cut fossil fuel consumption here, so somehow these people in environmental justice communities are gonna be better off. No, that's not good enough. We have to target our interventions so that the people who've been disproportionately affected are the first to benefit from these emission reductions across the board, that they have access to the clean energy, the renewable energy, the affordable clean energy, that other people who are getting to drive around in their electric vehicles and buying solar panels on their roofs have had for a while. We have to think about how things like tax breaks for these kinds of energy have benefited people who are relatively affluent, and the moment is now to bring it to everybody. Everyone needs to benefit from these clean energy solutions that are revolutionary for solving climate, but they also help bring down these local pollutants. I think the moment we're in this country is we're facing multiple crises at the same time. We don't get to pick one crisis. What we do get to pick are the solutions that will help address these multiple problems at the same time. And I think access to clean air, access to safe housing, access to healthcare are such fundamental determinants of societal well-being that they must be embedded in all our solutions.
So if we are speaking of specific policies and issues, you know, we all know that the tree canopy that we are blessed with in the city of Atlanta does help clean our air. We've been losing it rapidly. And the city of Atlanta, as one of our attendees to this webinar pointed out, is rewriting the tree protection ordinance. If the two of you were sitting with the mayor and other city officials, what would you want them to know about our tree canopy and why our trees matter?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a great question. So I think, especially in Atlanta, our tree canopy is important for multiple ways. It's important for the mental health benefits that it has, and for the physical health benefits that it does. When you have a very full tree canopy, it reduces air pollution by absorbing some of the chemicals, by also some of the Cleetus talked about PM 2.5 that is very damaging to the lungs and to the body, can actually stick to the leaves of trees and be taken out of the air. So on an overall basis, it's great. We really need to maintain our tree canopy. In addition to that, we can be strategic about where we want to plant new trees. One of the ways that we can reduce pollution near highways is to plant trees next to roads that can reduce the pollution that is released from the emissions of the cars and trucks when they're going by. And that's research that I'm currently engaged in. And it really shows really large potential benefits, especially for neighborhoods that are next to roadways who are predominantly low income and minority. That's a way to have an intervention to reduce local and improve mental health, and even increase perhaps places where people can walk and can even exercise. So there are just multiple benefits for maintaining and enhancing the tree canopy in Atlanta.
And
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Doctor.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the attendees said that in response to about the tree protection ordinance, that some builders are already beginning to argue that in order to build affordable housing, they should be allowed to clear cut the sites and not have to preserve trees. But I think what Dr. Fuller brought up an interesting aspect about this with the mental health aspect, because there is something to be said about the beauty they create, the access to nature that creates. I think trees, I'm a big tree hugger. I think they have such a calming effect. And I think sometimes we miss out on the aspect of the beauty and the access to nature that retaining these trees creates in neighborhoods. If you drive through like Buckhead, for instance, you see an incredible tree canopy. And that should not be something that's just available to wealthy families. So how do we get that message to the city?
And just one other aspect, in major cities like in Atlanta, having trees and greenery really helps against the urban heat island effect. When we have these very hot heat waves in summer, paved surfaces tend to just absorb that heat and hang on to it. And even if you have multi-day heat waves, it even retains it at night and lets it out, so you don't get any relief. And trees are a huge help in this situation. And again, studies show that low-income neighborhoods, often communities of color, have less greenery and less green space and are more exposed to the risk of these kinds of heat waves. And these heat waves kill, by the way. Yes, they can cause illness and all kinds of heat-related illnesses, but they kill people. So again, a way in which the way we've designed our cities and where we've put people and where we've allowed greenery to stay has had these kinds of consequences on people's health. I think we are being presented with a false premise when we're told it's either affordable housing or trees. Mm-hmm. This is not a box that any city or any community should find itself in. And the solutions need to be more holistic. Don't just look at one block and say, well, in this block, I can either have a tree or a house. This is why you need planning across a city and a metro area. And you really need to be thinking about open space as a key component of the well-being of people in that area. How do you combine open space with mass transit, with places you can walk, with dense living, so that you're not cutting down trees to create. There are lots of solutions that, you know, urban planners think about this all the time, but this premise that developers are presenting is clearly a false one.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
So I saw, oh, sorry, Dr. Fuller, but I saw that Stephanie voted today. She's got her sticker, and I want to get to more conversation about solutions, those that we can do individually and collectively. Dr. Martin Luther King said, either we must work together, and I ad-lib, as brothers and sisters, or perish as fools. So obviously one of the most important things is we can vote. And I just want to say on our website, on the Mothers and Others for Clean Air Action Alert, in that section, we actually encourage people to go there, find out who their Congress people are, how to connect with them, more specifically, and call them. We've given their numbers, and email them. We have a sample letter there. Let them know, and the attorneys general that of each state, so that, because they have to deal with this at that level too, through state legislation, and it's really important that we take action there. But can y'all address some of your, you know, we've talked about the importance of trees in our communities, but there are a lot of other ones that if we're really trying to make sure that no one else dies from systemic violence and dirty air, you know, how are we going to come together and, you know, combine our powers?
Mm-hmm. Well, that definitely was the first, when I was thinking about this question, was to vote is very important. Also, educating yourself about air pollution and what good air quality is, and finding out what it is in your neighborhood. You can buy several different types of sensors that are really good at measuring air pollution. And they're affordable compared to what's used in research. And the EPA, the different options, and they have a website called the EPA Air Sensor Toolbox, which I think will be posted in the chat, where you can go and look at some of these sensors, and then you can put them up in your house, in your neighborhood, and see what the concentrations are of these pollutants, so you can know for yourself. You can also support groups by volunteering or giving money. There are wonderful groups that are local, just for Atlanta area, that are regional or that are national, that are engaged in this work, that are doing work on the ground in Washington, and they need to have support and resources. And then you can tie into whatever they're doing, and there can be a wonderful exchange. So I think it's really good to work with the existing networks and knowledge bases that we have, especially in our local communities. And there is a lot out there.
Yeah, just to add briefly, I mean, I think it's really important for us all in this age where everything seems under assault not to lose hope, because we are agents of change and we have the numbers on our side. It's up to us to take those numbers and build it into power. I know vote sometimes sounds like, well, what is my one vote going to do? Your one vote really matters. And it doesn't stop there, of course. You have to hold the people that you vote into power accountable. It's not just one and done. You have to hold them accountable. And moreover, there really is a need for people to recognize their privilege in the system, to use their voices to hold people accountable. Show up, because really this is not just about environmental justice communities. It is about them first and foremost. But you know what the gift is? If you improve the air and water quality in environmental justice communities, it's going to benefit us all. This is about all of us. And then I would say, also, we have many of these solutions. The challenge has always been political will. So for example, I work on climate change and climate change policy. We've known for years now that transitioning away from coal and other fossil fuels towards renewable energy is a core element. And yet, like for example, in the Southeast, there's so much untapped potential around solar power. There's a continued dependence on coal, which comes with so many environmental repercussions. So we need to hold our utility companies responsible for the kind of future that they're planning on our behalf. Make sure that renewables are an ever-increasing part of the mix, because they are one of the cheapest forms of energy right now. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Coal is on its way out and needs to be on its way out. That also means we have to invest in a just transition for coal-dependent communities and coal miners so that they're not left out on the sidelines. But absolutely, coal has to get out of the system, and we can't switch to an overdependence on natural gas as we make that transition. So solutions are there. Please do vote. It really matters.
So
Well,
Laura,
go, Stephanie. I'm sure I'm seeing some good comments here and questions.
yeah, I know that on the chat, Veronica has posted information for everyone around how to take action, as well as some toolbox information. And then, like Laura said earlier, you can go to our website as well. But we have wrapped up all the questions that are in both the Q&A and the chat box. So I'm going to wrap that up since I don't see any others coming in, and turn it back over to Laura.
But there are a lot of good comments thanking Dr. Fuller and Dr. Cleetus for a refreshing dialogue and the important information that you shared. And I would love for each of you to give your final remarks, and then I'll have Veronica come back in and give a closing statement. So thank you all for joining us.
Dr. Fuller, would you like to go first?
Oh, okay, sure. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I think it's a wonderful conversation to have and to really open this up to everyone. I think it's clear that we are really impacting the environment in which we live, and it's just become very evident due to what's been going on around COVID-19. Many people are vulnerable, and it's a responsibility of all of us to do something about it. We can't sit on the sidelines. We need to take action in whatever way that we're able to, and every small action is going to be very important. So I would encourage everyone to find a group in their community that they can contact, or to go to EPA's website and look at a monitor that maybe can put up in, perhaps your kid's school or something, to call or email your congressperson, to really just take one small step to really figure out what kind of solutions we can make, because we really need to do it together. And again, I just thank you for this wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, I feel the same. Thank you so much for taking the time in the midst of everything that people are grappling with right now. And we have to have hope. I mean, I am a mom too. I have two young children, and you know, I refuse to say that their future is not going to be bright and prosperous. That's not just not, we can't let that happen. And you know, as Dr. Fuller and others have been saying, we know what we have to do. So let's just get up and get going and doing it. You know, get our policymakers, put pressure on them, be out on the streets, write your congressman, whatever is your jam, do it. But please get off the sidelines, join this fight, and you really are how the solution is going to happen in the world.
Well, thank you all. Thank you so much for this conversation. The chat box is just going nuts right now with people just saying insightful, refreshing, thank you, much needed conversation, inspiring. I think a lot of us needed this in this moment. So thank you so much for this time. I think we're all moms here. So I think it's a beautiful moment of motherly love and compassion and a lot of hopeful solutions. So I want to encourage everyone, if you haven't signed up to get our updates, please get our updates. We were live on Facebook, so if you're on Facebook, please share this recording. You know, as many people that can see this, you know, as possible, helps us in our work moving forward. And we're going to do another Clean Air conversation in August. We're taking July off for the summer, and so we're interested in hearing what other topics you want to hear about. You know, again, we dove into how air pollution and climate change disproportionately impacts vulnerable communities in the Southeast on our first conversation. Today we had scientists really giving us the facts on things, so we'd love to hear what you think about for next. Please email your elected officials. We put the link in the chat box and also on Facebook to the Stop the EPA Rollbacks action alert on our page. You can also call your elected officials. Their phone numbers are there, and we would love to hear if you do talk to them to please let us know what they said and what conversation. And as we continue to navigate the ever-changing world that we are in right now, we will continue to send out email updates and work collaboratively with our partners in the Southeast on the latest policy opportunities to make change happen in a positive way. So stay tuned, and thank you again to our panelists and to our moderators for this wonderful conversation.
So I wanted to take 1 second, Veronica. We've got folks, I think Veronica was referring to all of the panelists as mothers. We've got lots of folks in the audience that we know are of the male persuasion. And we
yes,
also
I was speaking of our panel and our moderators and myself. We are all picture of my son over my shoulder here.
Yes, and we know some of you in the audience have lots of people in your lives, but may not have children in your lives. So we want to make sure that we are inclusive of everyone. But yes, all of us on the panel happen to be moms.
Thank you for flagging that comment for me. Yes, and that's why we are mothers and others for clean air. So please follow us on.
Veronica.
Yes.
Virtual hugs to everybody. You know, this should be our new sign. It's like just wrap our arms around our community and all that we want to work with and going forward. So virtual hugs and kisses, lots of love. Forgiveness and love, right?
Compassion, yes.
Compassion, yeah.
I love that.
Well, thanks to everyone
so much, and we'll post this on our website, and this is also on our Facebook feed, so you can watch it again and share it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.